You are now listening to The Mind of Tommy Bunnz, and this is Black Friday.
Black Friday.
Black Friday.
It is Black Friday.
Peace, family. I'm your host, Tommy Bunnz, and welcome to episode 9 of the Black Friday podcast. Give yourself a big hand. Yeah. All right. It's been a few weeks. Back at it. I want to jump in and kind of like preface this episode with some thoughts on, I guess, power has been a big theme in my life these last few months, I should say. And just, taking it all the way back to Amir Hassan's class, political science class at AI, where I went to school. And, one of the first real political science pieces of literature that I read was called Understanding Power by Noam Chomsky. And I remember when I first had to buy that book because it was a required reading for the class. I remember like Noam Chomsky. I was just really tripping more so off the dude's name, like Noam Chomsky. Who the fuck got a name like Noam Chomsky? But being limited in my exposure to just any ideas, political or economic, or even radical at that time, this was like my first real introduction into anything outside of a typical, LA USD or, inner city educational curriculum. Like, they're not teaching us about, Karl Marx in school. They're not teaching us about, Milton, the thoughts of Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and Noam Chomsky, for that matter. They're not teaching us about, intellectually, like at least in my schools they wasn't. We didn't know nothing really about the Black Panthers. We didn't know really about how power in general as a theme. We didn't even know how the concept of power truly worked, other than how we were able to influence our friends and gain what we would call popularity at the school. So we had a very, very elementary, if even infantile, understanding of just the way that the world was working. And by high school, and I'm talking about, in high school, elementary, junior high school, we have no idea of this. And so when I get to my sophomore year in college around 2005, I'm just now being introduced to it. So I'm a baby, probably in some of the most formative years in my life, when, I'm already considered an adult and I have absolutely no understanding of what power truly is and how power could be wielded and utilized, and has been wielded and utilized throughout the centuries prior to me being even born. So, my first coming into the understanding of that power is a tangible thing, or is even a perceived thing, something that's more metaphysical than it is actually physical, and it's something that we all kind of collectively agree that exists, and our interface with it, or how we utilize it in interface with it in our day-to-day lives, varies from person to person. So that book was the first time that I come into the concept of understanding what power is. And so, we fast forward back to today, and, it's just been really popping up just around me, in the films that I watch, in, the articles that I'm reading, in this general election that's happening, that's become more of almost like good American TV than an actual exchange of real ideas, because all the candidates are cryptic in what they're talking about. They're not necessarily revealing anything. These aren't the most forward-thinking individuals in our country, and I don't think that they go around parading themselves as they do. Well, actually, they do. They do say they're the best because these are the ideas that they support. However, a lot of what they're talking about is based on research and information compiled for them by the people that I named, like the intellectuals of the day. So power, yeah, like I said, this episode is definitely about power. It's I'm going to talk about a lot of different things, but I mean, everything thematically is driven under the mantra of, or the idea of, power being somehow interconnected with interconnected with it in some form or fashion. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about was this film that I recommend everybody go see. And you ain't even got to go see it. It's on Netflix. It's called the Black Power Mixtape, and it's a documentary that was produced back in 2011, and it's really a film that kind of like fell under the radar for its strong kind of like anti-American rhetoric, so much that the film, while the filmmakers were actually producing the film, were recording and capturing what was taking place from 1967 to around 1975. The filmmakers began to connect with leaders of, the Black Power movement and the Black Liberation movement, and America, due to these Swedish entities taking interest in the struggles of Black people in America during this time, they even severed political ties with the country of Sweden. And so that goes to show you, in a sense, like how we were able to kind of like utilize that, our collective power, to create waves. You know what I'm saying? Now, am I boasting and saying that that's something that, is that a milestone? Not necessarily, because, if you gauge what took place in the 60s, realistically with what's happening today, we have some small victories. But, statistically, your intellectuals who speak on behalf of the young men and women in school now, and who've been in school for the last, I would say 20, 30 years, this millennial generation and this generation coming after us, and even Generation X, depending on where you are age-wise, educationally, like, we still are at the bottom of the barrel statistically when it comes to education. And that, honestly, when you look at that information, like, for real, and you really like put it in context, is what is that saying? Is that, when it comes to education is directly related to, how we innovate. You know what I'm saying? If we're not being educated in the proper forms, where innovation is taking place and where the country is moving forward, in a sense, then essentially, we're not going to excel. And when you think about like technology, technology is almost absent in our school systems. Music and art is being consistently cut. And just a fundamental understanding of economics, a fundamental understanding of politics. Traditionally, we take a semester of econ and a semester of government. You know what I'm saying? We learn the history that is, almost like prepackaged in the by the state, and that becomes our curriculum. They decide what we should learn. And I've always had like a big problem with the state, having that much control over what it is that we learn, because of the fact that the state decides, in a sense, where the generation is going to go, in a sense. And but if you look at that, how that's coupled with how society has transformed over the years, what we're learning in school is actually not even to put us in a space to compete, to be, at the forefront of innovation in this country. It's actually teaching us to be subservient, because, in a sense, or just a skilled part and parcel of the labor force. It doesn't promote the idea of, manifesting one's own destiny, because of the fact that if you look at what's being taught, you teach me parts and parcels of history. You teach me parts of history that have absolutely nothing to do with my experience now. We're not necessarily producing academics, in a sense, or even just individuals who have a well-rounded grasp on reality. We're teaching people to just go to school, get a good job, go to school, get a good education, and get a good job. That's it. And not to necessarily be the individuals who are going to create the systemic changes that do plague us at the moment. You see what I'm saying? Because if you ask me, if you ask me if we are at the bottom of the barrel of education, then that means we're like the Los Angeles Lakers. That means we're like the 76ers. You know what I'm saying? We have the least wins. You know, we have the least shot of being the championship team, even if not the championship team, the second place team, getting our team all the way, or just being in contention for the finals, or just even competing in the playoffs, just competing at the highest level. You know, we're not even in that discussion. We're at this is the worst team in the league discussion. And to me, that's a crisis. You know what I'm saying? But our situation right now in the community reminds me so much of the NBA, because of the fact that the sense of urgency seems to be as though, like, hey, well, you know, for the very few players who make more than league minimum, you know, and they got a nice chunk of the pie and their lifestyles are really relatively comfortable, versus the individuals who are making league minimum, who even making league minimum are living okay. You know, they can't really complain. You know what I'm saying? And you would say that it manifests a level of complacency at the reality that you are the worst team in the league, which is the macro, you know, fact. When you look at it from a macro level, you know, and you clump yourself in with the rest of the people who are competing, the other teams that are competing, you're at the bottom of the fucking list. And I would liken the black community to the Los Angeles Lakers. Yeah, you know, it's a flare about you know, black people. That's evident. You know what I'm saying? It's an air of just fluidity that just comes out of us, you know. And even to describe it almost feels as though I'm doing an injustice to my people, because I mean, it's just the swag. You know what I'm saying? It's in the DNA, man. Like, we do shit, and it just makes you feel good about it when you see us doing us. You know what I mean? And not to say that, you know, other ethnicities don't feel the same way, but I mean, it's evident that there's a rhythm associated with black people, and that comes from, you know, our lineage and our ancestors, and, you know, the cloth that we're cut from. To say that, you know, that to me connects us with the Showtime Lakers. You know what I'm saying? Magic Johnson behind the neck, behind the back passes, dunks, like really just taking basketball to a whole nother level when it comes to being an American pastime that's entertaining. You know what I'm saying? Like, you think about the early days of watching basketball, and you damn near feel like you don't want to watch it. You know what I'm saying? Because it's boring, it's not exciting. It's just, you know, it's all right. But I mean, I think you pile on time, and the game complexes itself. You know, people become more skilled at playing the game, and you can now do more complex things. You can shoot from farther. You can dribble the ball with speed and efficiency, so you can go between your legs, behind your back. You can chain those moves together, and then, you know, it makes for an interesting way of perceiving the game, of watching the game. You know what I'm saying? Like watching Allen Iverson play, watching Steph Curry play today. Like, you know, cross you, go between the legs, go behind the back, step back, you know, pull up from 10 feet behind the three-point line, which is a supremely low efficiency shot, but it goes nothing but net, and he does it consistently. It's like, okay, the game has evolved, and that's something that, you know, African American athletes have brought to the game. So I connect us to like the Showtime Lakers. And, you know, when you think about the Lakers, and not just the Showtime Lakers, but the organization of the Lakers altogether, because the Lakers started out somewhere else. You know, just like how we started out in Africa, the Lakers started out, you know, in Minneapolis, you know, and then they migrated over to, you know, California, and in Los Angeles in particular, Inglewood. And then, you know, for us, it's like we migrated here to America. And, you know, over the course of that history, you know, even before the migration, not saying that there's an equivalent parallel between Laker history and our history, but just to, you know, as a metaphor, to say like the Lakers have an illustrious legacy and an illustrious history. The same can be said about, you know what I'm saying, people of African descent, you know, who live in America. You know, there's an illustrious history to us. You know, we even in, you know, Black American inventors and pioneers and innovators who have pushed the culture and pushed humanity forward, can, you know, that speaks volumes. But then when you think about the history and legacy of African achievement, of what we achieved in Africa prior to the invasion of Rome, of Greece, the invasion of the Arabs, you know, before that there were dynasties that existed thousands, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years before, you know, Socrates, who's considered one of the most foremost thinkers and philosophers in human history, before he was even a baby, before he was even who he was, we already had government, we already had books and libraries on thought. You know, we already had, you know, pyramids built. We had civilization already. You know, and we had ways of viewing the world. Now, are those views still used today? Of course they are, because there's a fundamental nature to humans that will supersede time and will supersede, you know, whatever the religion or popular understanding of human interaction and our understanding of the universe. There's fundamentals that will always be here. And that we can confirm through science. And so, you know, what does all of this have to do with power? Well, it takes a tremendous amount of it for a team to will themselves out of last place to become contenders. And it takes rebuilding. It takes working together. It takes effort. It takes energy and power. And that's what the brothers and sisters in the Black Power Mixtape were attempting to do. You know, and I think that these Swedish filmmakers did an incredible job with capturing the spirit of the times. You know, it was directed by a Swedish filmmaker named Goran Olsson. And the film captures intimate moments in the struggle for Black liberation during the 60s and 70s with an air of like beauty and artistic composition that connected us to the humanity of the individuals at the forefront of the conversation at that time. You know, as opposed to the traditional American propagandized narratives that, you know, labeled these individuals the greatest threat to the internal security of the U.S., you know, terrorists and cop killers, you know what I'm saying? And so the film explores not only the Black Power movement from the likes of just the Black Panther Party either, but instead, you know, from, you know, the ancillary and pivotal figures who echoed those same sentiments of Black liberation at that time, like, you know, Angela Davis, Stokely Carmichael, before they were members of the Black Panther Party, and even, you know, Harry Belafonte, and a number of other individuals during that time. You know, the film chronicles Black life in America from 1967, like I said, 1967 and 1975, before Dr. King's assassination, to the war on drugs and the war in Vietnam in the 70s. And it was interesting, like, with this film, you got to see like a lot of the intimate moments, like the moments where, you know, Stokely is not on stage being the Stokely Carmichael that, you know, most of us know him as, you know, because if it wasn't for YouTube, you know, I mean, I don't know. I know I probably would have came across Stokely Carmichael in just my pursuit of information relative to, you know, solving the problems of my community. But I also, I don't know if I would have ever really truly got a chance to understand, you know, a little bit about who this brother was, other than if I didn't meet him in person. But by the time that I came into the understanding of who he was, he had already been passed on. You know, he died in 1998. God bless the dead. He was only 57 years old. Very, very young man. Which is another thing that I'm learning about, you know, brothers in the struggle. Like, fuck, man. Like, any Black man who's trying to, you know, utilize his vehicle and understanding of what's going on to move us into a different paradigm. He dies rather young, which shows that it takes a lot of effort and energy, and so much that it even can be said that it is responsible for taking young men's life earlier than required because of just the immense strain and stress that it puts on the mind, body, and soul. But yeah, I want to play a clip from an interview with Angela Davis on, what her thoughts were on the film so that you can get a better understanding of the context.
See, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Is their portrayal accurate? Because what's interesting is it's their outsiderness, their almost not quite Martians, but they're looking at this as this, here's this fishbowl, how do we make sense of this? Here are these people that we're talking to. Somehow, did they get an interesting or a correct snapshot of what was happening in the movements that you were involved in at the time?
Well, I've actually thought about that question, and I don't know whether it was so much their outsiderness that allowed them to produce something unique, but rather their sense of the connections between what was going on in the U.S. With the rest of the world. What was so important about the movement of the late 60s and the early 70s was its internationalism and its connectedness with what was happening in Africa, especially with what was happening in Vietnam. And I think the Swedish journalists recognized this and so told the story from not a provincial U.S.-centric perspective, but rather from a global perspective.
As someone who understands the importance of the illusion of control, especially in a community that has somewhat vilified the idea of power, almost to our own demise, I thought the film showcased our attempts at establishing a basis for that socio-political ideology, that self-determination, and that ability to define one's own destiny relatively honest. Unfortunately, although Kweli will argue...
First thing that jumps out to me about Black Power Mixtape is how these ideas and concepts that these people were starting to experiment with have played out in the real world, and to see sort of the rudiments of Black Power as a concept in this country. It's manifested itself in many ways, from Oprah Winfrey to 50 Cent.
I would argue that the remnants of the Black Power movement are more closer to a Dr. Jared Ball of Morgan State, Dr. Umar Johnson, Dr. Boyce Watkins, and I would even probably push it to the margins and extend remnants of that to Dame Dash, even more so than I would to 50 Cent. And like I said, Dame, I would even place him on the margins because he's for sure a capitalist, as is 50 Cent and as is Oprah. When we talk about the remnants of the Black Power movement, there's no way that anybody who really and truly were impacted and the offspring of the Black Power movement, I don't see how you don't adopt any type of socialist ideology, even within your capitalistic pursuits. And I don't see anything socialist about Oprah or 50 Cent, if you ask me. I think that they're both servants of capitalism, and they're willing to do whatever they got to do to make the most money that they could possibly make. And I think that they also enjoy the fact that they are considered elite. And I think they enjoy the idea of there being classism and class division. And I say that because you never hear them speak out in opposition to just corporate greed, and you never really see them speaking out against the injustices that are going on in our communities with the intention of actually doing something about them. And that's another thing is, it's not about just speaking about the issues. It's about actually like getting your feet dirty and making sure that your contribution and your energy and power translates into real actual labor and real actual effort towards moving in the direction that you want to go. Another reason why I say that we don't truly see the children of the Black Power movement today is because of the fact that the movement was so heavily demonized, persecuted, and eradicated through imprisonment and murder. And the fear of even associating with the term black, radical, socialist, communist, it placed fear in the hearts of so many men, women, and children in the black community that today, the 60s is about as mythological as the so-called, conscious community that identifies and uses ancient Egypt as this romanticized past that they somehow, are an extension of, rightfully so. And it's a great point in history to be black, because that was when we ruled the world. But I mean, like I said, the principles and ideologies of what comes with Black Power are so fear invoking today that we brush it off, you know what I'm saying, or we only have those conversations in private, and we don't take those thoughts and beliefs into our day-to-day lives because it can cause conflict and can jeopardize our security. And so why do I say that? Well, the succession of the Black Power movement, in my opinion, would have manifested itself in the development of prominent black scholarship throughout America, when in fact, like I said, according to Dr. Ronald Fryer, professor of economics at Harvard.
So in America, roughly 43% of students are doing math at grade level, and roughly 40% of students are doing reading at grade level. The next thing I want you to see here is that there's not a city in the United States in which more than 25% of black students can either do math or reading at grade level. There's not a city in our country in which more than a quarter of black students can do reading or math at grade level. I think that's, I don't mean to be alarmist, but I think that's a crisis. The third thing I want you to get out of this graph is that in places like Detroit, where there's tremendous poverty in the inner city, only 3% of 8th graders can do math at grade level. Okay? When they're in 4th grade, it's actually 2%. So I did the calculations. There's about 6,600 4th graders in Detroit public schools. If you take 2% of that, that's roughly 132 kids. You could fit them all on 2 school buses.
That's the one thing that separates this generation from the individuals at the forefront of the conversation in the 60s. The amount of emphasis that was placed not only on a high quality education from a prestige university, but an education that armed students with the context in which to truly move about to solve the problems they faced in their communities. And in doing so resulted in shifts in power that led to local, state, and federal backlash as power was amassed. And today, most black intellectuals serve the status quo and become talking heads for institutes of higher education who have an agenda to preserve the American status quo and remind everyone how ignorant they are for looking at the data so-called incorrectly.
That's the way intellectuals are, overwhelmingly, all through history. Intellectuals overwhelmingly are servants of power. Now, intellectuals write history. So when you read what they write, they look very noble and adversarial and so on. But when you look at what actually happened, all the criticisms we make of the media apply to them, and that's significant because none of the institutional factors hold in that case. The institutional factors that we looked at have to do with the corporate structure, the advertisers who purchase it, but that's not true. And that doesn't apply to the academy? That doesn't apply to a college professor. There are other pressures, but not those. But the outcome is pretty much the same.
Yeah, so the Black Power Mixtape was a great piece of filmmaking, like I said. I'm sad more folks didn't see it, and I'm sad and it took me a while to get to see it. I completely understand why a film of this magnitude, though, would be suppressed here in the States because, America has a very difficult time looking itself in the mirror and actually taking responsibility for its actions. For God's sake, it still hasn't even mustered up a formal apology acknowledging its role in the enslavement of African people. Something it did for the Japanese and the indigenous Native Americans. And an interesting note about the Japanese, was the fact that they admitted that they modeled their strategies for restitution on the strategies employed during the civil rights and Black Power movement. So I thought that was interesting. But I think that shows an actual fundamental difference in what the Japanese's intentions were with that power versus what our intentions were with that power. But also I understand that, opening trade up with Japan, and having a political relationship with Japan through righting the wrongs of human rights violations towards the Japanese people that lived in America at the time. I thought that was, that's a great political move to do. Whereas blacks in America, we don't necessarily have a strong or even concentrated second nation that we can call, home. We don't necessarily have dual citizenship in Africa the same way that we, someone from China would have, or someone from Sweden would have, or someone from Japan would have, when they're in America. You know what I'm saying? And America doesn't have a relationship that is respectful with any African nation that it doesn't, rule through colonialism. So for us, apologizing to black people does nothing in the eyes of the international community. It almost would make America look weak. It would almost make America look like, your slaves slapped you in the face and made you say sorry. You know what I'm saying? And you didn't have to. You see what I'm saying? And until America believes that it has to say sorry and atone for the human rights violations that is caused on black people that's impacting us today, this we're never going to necessarily get anywhere from that. We either just gonna have to say, all right, well, we just gonna let it go, let bygones be bygones, and move on. Or this is going to be a fight until America does. Needless to say, I'll be touching more on this idea of the Black Power movement and what that even means in the context of today's social, political, and economic climate as we progress. Until then, let's stay in the spirit of power as we transition to our next piece. Moving on.
Puppy, you're my one and only puppy love.
Also available on Netflix is a film that came out a few years ago. It's called Water and Power, and it's an American folktale told from the perspective of a poet who watches the rise and fall of twin brothers from East L.A. named Water and Power. They were named by their father, a Chicano man who worked at the LADWP. Water and Power were brought up as warriors, always in the boxing ring, fighting each other, and always being encouraged to look out for each other no matter what. It kind of lost its grasp on the plot at times and drifted into these like surreal elements of the story from a mystical point of view. But I think overall, I thought this film was dope because of the filmmaker's thoughtfulness. And, that's something that I've said about Ryan Coogler. And I'll say that again about this director, Richard Montoya, who's known for writing the film Nacho Libre, starring Jack Black, which is hilarious. There are no chips. Where are the chips? There are no chips.
What is this?
Leftovers. Enjoy.
There is no flavor. There are no spices. Where are the chips?
Somebody stole them.
Did you not tell them that they were the Lord's chips?
I was trying to.
You are useless, Ignacio.
Silence, brothers. This is the worst lunch I ever had.
Your only job is to cook. Do you not realize I have had diarrhea since Easter's?
Okay. Maybe I am not meant for these duties. Cooking duty. Dead guy duty. Maybe it's time for me to get a better duty.
Johnny singing at the party. I am singing, it's my turn to sing at the party. Everyone is dancing, happy party. But Ramses is not dancing, he does not dance at the parties.
That shit is funny. Dope film, Nacho Libre. But yeah, I thought this film was dope for its thoughtfulness. You know, I felt like this is something that I should be talking about. You know what I mean? Like the significance of the LA River, living in LA and having a river. You know what I'm saying? Like there is actually a river that we have. And when you think about rivers, you think about that traditional, like American, almost like The Revenant. You know, those kind of like frontier days where America was completely open and it was beautiful, and it was like the whole country was forests and mountain ranges and grasslands and creeks and rivers and little lakes and shit like that. Like it was just open for just, you can gaze at it, and it was just beautiful. It was just this beautiful place. And I'm sure that that's what the settlers thought when they first landed here. They were just like, they were in heaven. They were in paradise. America was exactly what heaven would look like if you died, and this is where you would go. I'm sure. You know, I'm sure that's what the Africans thought when we was over here building with the Olmecs and the Mayans, you know, and trading with them, you know, before Christopher Columbus even came to America. I'm sure we respected this part of the world as being very, very beautiful. That's what Water and Power made me think about. You know, how he talked about how one brother, Water, was a politician, and his initiative and his plan and his, I guess his legacy was implementing and planting 1 million trees and providing 1 million jobs for poor and working class folks right at the bed of the river, and revitalizing and repurposing how we perceive what the LA River is, and just almost paying homage to the sacredness of the bodies of water that, you know, feed populations of people, you know. And it made me think about just now, like all of the water that I get comes out of a dispenser, and it's bottled somewhere that I have no idea where, you know. And it just makes me feel like, you know, even though it's like common sense to just go on Google and see, you know, oh, this is the plant where the water from Sparklets comes from. However, there's still a disconnect. It's still like actually not going and being at that factory and seeing and talking to the people and having a relationship with where your water comes from is it creates this sense of, just like automation, like, you know, like you take for granted the fact that your heart is beating right now and that your lungs are expanding, you know, because these are things that we give no thought to. You know, I was looking at the film from that aspect, like, man, I thought that was a beautiful tribute to the river. And it wasn't even really like the film is all about this river. You know, the film is really about two brothers, like I said, named Water and Power. And you know, in talking about Water, he has a twin brother named Power who's a crooked LAPD cop. And so there's this clash. It's like the story begins when one of the brothers has made a mistake and now he needs his other brother, and there's this power struggle between the two of them as to who's going to be the one to save the day. And I thought it was an interesting play on, you know, family, traditional Mexican values that predate, you know, even America, just showing how, you know, Mexican Americans or just Mexicans in general have a deep connection with, you know, the spiritual forces that govern and guide nature, and how they tap into those to, even in a present context, to see like how the weather and how, you know, things that take place, signs and symbols and metaphors, translate into what's going to take place in the real world. And that's where I said it got a little, surreal, because I mean, it's hard to kind of like go off of, the weather patterns now to show, to take it as a sign of what's truly happening when, weather is constantly manipulated. It doesn't go all the way too deep into it. I'm philosophizing over it, but I understand the mysticism behind it. I understand the metaphor. I understand the beauty of how a group of people can connect to the natural phenomenon that takes place with weather patterns, and they connect it to something ancestral. But of course, I think it's still an entertaining film to watch, to see how, politics, in the street, and the people in between who find themselves like caught up in the crossfire. I think it's an interesting play on both of those extremes, both of those realities. So that's Water and Power. It's on Netflix. It's produced by, and it was written and directed by a brother named Richard Montoya. And you should check it out. So yeah, there's been this big debate about the Nina Simone biopic that's set to come out soon, and the big hoopla is over the casting choice of Zoe Saldana as Nina. Now, as a filmmaker, if you ask me, would I cast Zoe Saldana, I say no. She wouldn't even be a consideration. Why? Look at her. I mean, she resembles Nina in no shape, way, or form. She had to put on what looks like blackface and a prosthetic nose, and she's a lot more petite than Nina was. And to my knowledge, she doesn't even sing. So casting her, to me, would cause more of a headache trying to force a look onto her than actually casting someone like India Ari to play Nina. Or, as someone suggested, Uzo Aduba from Orange is the New Black to play her. It's an easy call. Plus the fact that it's not just one person barking at the casting decision. There are thousands of people who are saying this every day, that this is going to be bad. And as a business person who understands that your audience is the most important component of your film's success at the box office, if they're telling you, if your audience is telling you they don't want this actor, why would you force them to actor that they don't want to see, regardless of if their logic is grounded or not? I originally thought the whole thing would blow over and we'd be talking about what's going to happen to our country in 8 years, but we're still talking about this. And it's gotten to the point where Bob Johnson, you all know, former owner of BET, jumped into the conversation saying that
they're both clearly of African descent. I mean, to say that if I'm going to cast a movie, I got to hold a brown paper bag up to the actress and say, oh, sorry, you can't play her. I mean, who's to decide when you're black enough?
And my issue with his remarks are that he assumes that we don't understand, we as black audiences and just audiences in general, that we don't understand what it takes for a movie to be good, as if casting isn't an essential component to the story and isn't as essential to the authenticity of a story as the storytelling itself. I mean, he even went further to educate us ignorant black folks in the best way that, us black folk know how to do. And that's going right into the slavery motif.
It's unfortunate that African Americans are talking about this in a way that harkens back to how we were treated when we were slaves. The slave masters separated light-skinned blacks from dark-skinned blacks, and some of that social DNA still exists today among many black people.
You know what? To be so pro-black and so Afrocentric, he sure did lose his mind when he sold the most valuable asset in the black community to Viacom, who have basically turned BET into MTV Black. I'm kind of over the elders that continuously tell us to shut up when we express our viewpoints that don't support their interests. Of course he's upset because his business is the distribution company behind the film. And if we don't watch, it hurts his bottom line, despite the film not being authorized by Simone's family. Why should we bless a film with support when the film isn't even blessed by the very family of the woman you are portraying? How disrespectful is that? And this has even gotten Queen Latifah to come out and tell folks to stop judging. And I find it interesting that the things our high-profile celebrities will risk their reputations for versus what they remain silent for. Should we support one another? Absolutely. Should we suppress our thoughts and ideas? Absolutely not. Because our thoughts and ideas have been proven time and time again to set trends that the nation then follows. Just go look at the Nielsen consumer report for black people in 2013 and 14. Black people set trends. It's a statistical proven fact. You know what I'm saying? We know what we like. We know what we don't like. Data shows that. So if the people say we don't want Zoe Saldana, and you give me Zoe Saldana anyway, understand that your disrespect for the preference and intelligence of your audience will be the reason why your business endeavor fails. Not because of the lack of support in the black community or because the black people are thinking like slaves. When I go to El Pollo Loco and I get that spicy chipotle burrito, I specifically say no sour cream. Sometimes I say it twice because I want to make sure that they heard me, right? And when I open that wrapper and bite into that burrito, I expect that there will be no sour cream. And the minute that it is, you failed to deliver as a business. And it's on you. Bob Johnson's comments are like telling me,
it's just sour cream. Stop complaining. You know how many countries don't even have fast food restaurants to serve them food at all? Be happy you even have a burrito.
When the simple solution would be to just make a new burrito, satisfy the customer, and move on to the next. Even the elite have forgot how spoiled they are. There would be no Bob Johnson without the viewership of the people who drove those ad dollars to his network. You know, the content was always okay, but what was more important was that it was the one place where we felt like it was ours. Now, even our own look at us as if we're a burden to them as they ask us to dig into our wallets and support black. You know, fuck out of here with that. I'd rather just give my money to Fox. Just because you black, it don't mean that that's the reason why I'm supposed to buy your product. And I think we have to get into a space where we can't allow people to use the brand black phenomenon to manipulate us. You know what I'm saying? We understand that there's a cultural trend happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. So a lot of people are thinking about ways to be more involved in the black community and support more adventures and ideas that come from black people. But let's not also forget, we got a lot of black people who have, as you know, Dr. Amos Wilson would say, you know, a white man's way of thinking. And as business people, they're just following the trend. And so they're selling you black products, but they don't have a pro-black philosophy and ideology connected to their business and their business's mission. Their business mission is still to maximize profit by any means necessary, without being illegal. And that's the nature of capitalism at its core. And so you got a lot of folks who just gonna sell you some shit that's black because of the fact that they know that that's where the minds of the people are, and they're willing to manipulate you and make you feel stupid and make you feel like you're a slave if you don't support it. Well, first and foremost, man, we know what we like, we know what we don't like, and if the shit feel wrong, it's wrong. And if we ain't supporting it, we ain't supporting it. Don't let nobody manipulate you and tell you how you supposed to support yourself. Nina Simone was heavily invested in the efforts of the Black Power movement because it directly impacted and affected her. There are a lot of black people who didn't have those experiences because at that time they were in Ivy League schools and they were getting that, white man's education, and they were rising through the ranks of class and social status, and the same reality that many blacks in America were facing, they weren't necessarily facing. So it's almost impossible to have sympathy for it. So for me, I'm not letting nobody tell me how I'm supposed to think. Even though I understand that this is, the new method of warfare. It's psychological. Noam Chomsky talks about it all the time, where he says, we're manufacturing consent. We understand that it's much more unpopular in human affairs to rule by force. You can't give nobody no lashing because of the fact that they don't agree with you no more. That ain't gonna fly, because you're gonna have a lot of motherfuckers trying to hit your ass back and give you a lashing. So you have to rule people by manipulation of thought. So you have to hypnotize people. You have to sway people's opinions. You have to tell people false truths. You have to lie to people. You have to make people feel stupid. You have to make people look at themselves and hate themselves. You have to make people. You have to change the language barrier. You have to change the language. You have to set a barrier in place from what you're talking about to what they understand. And if we look at it from, the different aspects of our education, we can see that. Poor communities, the quality of education is significantly less than in more affluent communities. The affluent communities want to continue to rule the world. And so that the power that these individuals who are on the other side of the income bracket have is really a perceived power, and it's really an allowed power, you know, because the minute you begin to take away your resources and your money from Coca-Cola and you say, you know what, I'm never buying another Coca-Cola in my life. Just think, you know, if there are 10 million black people who buy Coca-Cola at $3 a bottle every single week or every single month, you have $30 million going into Coca-Cola every single month. But just imagine if there was another soda company owned by someone who was going to sell it to you at the same price, but it was going to also create jobs for you, and it was also going to provide you with ingredients that wouldn't poison your body. That $30 million now is a much more smarter investment than the $30 million that's going into Coca-Cola. So we have to kind of like figure out how we're going to play the game, you know, and develop for ourselves to where we can compete at the same level, you know. And that's still a shaky conversation, man. That's still something shaky, but it definitely doesn't constitute, you know, the right for individuals, whether they're elders or they not, to try to dictate how people should think, man. You know, I don't give a fuck. You know, if I don't like the way a portobello mushroom looks, that doesn't mean that I'm unintelligent or I'm a slave because of the fact that I'm missing out on the fact that it's heavy in iron and, you know, magnesium, and it's high in fiber, and it's such a benefit to my body's digestive system. I don't give a fuck if it is or not. I don't like the way it looks, so I'm not fucking with it. There are a lot of foods that are high in iron and are great for the digestive system that I can consume other than this portobello mushroom. I don't have to. You know what I'm saying? Especially when there's options available. And for me, that's what I'm saying, is that, you know, there's so many options available for us, is that, you know, we feel like we have to kind of like go with what people say. You know, we can create our own options. And that's exactly what we're doing, man. We're working on creating, we're in the process right now of finalizing a film screening here in the city of Inglewood, where we're going to be showcasing the latest upcoming talent. That's, you know, producers, directors, writers, cinematographers, you know, musicians. You know, we creating a platform where their work can be showcased for individuals and audiences, to where that they can start, you know, gaining some notoriety and getting a lot of that support from, you know, audiences that want to see other shit, you know, that want to see alternative stories, that want to find themselves and find the ideas and stories that connect with them in the world. So that's what we working on, man. And so I'm gonna end it right there, man. It's been this one has been interesting, man. You know, each one I seem like I'm always kind of like finding myself like, damn, like it's a lot of work to do out here. It's a lot of work to do, and you know, it's not gonna get done with just me. It's not gonna get done with just me and a couple people. It's gonna really take a collective of us. Like I said, it's gonna take a lot of power and energy, you know, because, you know, we at the bottom of the mountain, and it's a lot of us that got to get up to this mountain, you know, or find a place, you know, on the mountain that is feasible enough for us as individuals. But to get up that motherfucker, we're gonna definitely need each other. And so, you know, that's why I encourage people to give social currency. I'm not charging for this. I'm not paying, you know, I'm not getting paid by nobody. This podcast isn't owned by no corporation. We don't got no sponsorships. You know, this is raw, uncut information produced by the people for the people. This is where freedom really exists. You know what I'm saying? But for that to grow into opportunities for other people, other podcasters, other authors, other writers, other economists, other educators, other business owners, it requires support. And nobody's going to know that I'm here and that this program is available and that these opportunities are here in the world if that social currency element doesn't exist. You know, and the social currency is the primordial currency that fuels all business endeavors in America and abroad. Because without the support of people, you don't have business. You just have something that you're doing. You just have a product. You just have a product that nobody's buying, that nobody's interested in. And so the social component, and the reason why I call it social currency, because I want to get back to just the basic endorsement model, where it's like, I fucks with what you're doing, I support you, and boom, let me share it and pass it along. And let the life of, the product develop on its own, you know what I'm saying? And allow people to gravitate to it the right way. So I encourage everybody to give that social currency a like, a share, a comment on Facebook. Tell somebody what's going on over here at the Black Friday podcast if you like it. If you don't, man, even say that. Even tell me what you don't like. Tell me what to change. Give me some ideas. Give some feedback. You know what I'm saying? It's not just about positivity. I want to make this the best podcast that it could possibly be. So some feedback is definitely encouraged. We got a lot of good stuff that we working on this year. We reaching out to a lot of people when it comes to being guests on the podcast, as far as economists, psychologists, educators, activists, entertainers, artists, musicians. I want to build with everybody to get a real authentic perspective on what's going on, to bring this information to light, to let people know what's out here, what's available. This world is huge and the opportunities are limitless. All we got to do is just tap into it. And that's what I want the Black Friday podcast to be, is a portal to connect with, alternative points of views that enhance the quality of our lives. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, I'm not going to talk no more. Tommy Bunnz, host of the Black Friday podcast. Enjoy your weekend.
Slow it down
Peace.
to a medium groove.
Mr. Marty up in the rock copter, can you hear me?